Hey, comrades. For today, I wanted to kick it off by talking a little bit about some of the updates about the election and the Supreme Court situation. Also, obviously, Breonna Taylor. But before that, right, I did need to get this in. So I got. I'm not teaching in person this semester. I'm teaching online. My wife and I both teach at Georgia State, right? Most like, the overwhelming majority of academics, we don't have any sort of job security, but we have annual contracts at Georgia State. And we both got permission to go online, but the default right now is that everybody's supposed to be in person because it is Georgia, the state where the Governor Kemp reopened so early that even Donald Trump was a little bit critical of him about it at one point. So obviously there's a lot of political pressure on the university system. But to soften the blow, among other things, they sent everybody in the mail these Georgia State University masks. And I just opened mine up, because obviously I'm not teaching in person this semester. And I, mostly been doing, curbside pickup for groceries. So I haven't gone out much lately. But I busted it out today so I could go pick up my wife's prescription refills from CVS. And I saw that inside the mask, there was this little note saying, "Warning, please understand that our face masks are not a replacement for medical-grade personal protective equipment. And in circumstances where medical-grade personal protective equipment is recommended, the mask should not be used. The decision to use this mask is solely your own." So this just feels like, man, all right, well, we're still going to make most of you teach in person during a plague, but here's a cheap piece of cloth. It's not going to do much for you, but good luck. Seems to be about the implication there. If anybody's watching this who is a Georgia State University employee, Google the United Campus Workers of Georgia. That's a union that's trying to organize the campus, because it would be real nice when things like this happen if there was a faculty union that actually had some sort of collective bargaining process, could do things like file safety complaints. So something to think about. Again, that's United Campus Workers of Georgia. But this is not what I was going to talk about. What I was going to talk about today, and this is before the Breonna Taylor news, so we're definitely going to talk about that also, is some trial balloons that some people involved in the Trump campaign have been putting out, that they are just going to blatantly try to steal the election if it doesn't go their way, and it's close enough that they think they can get away with it. And then very closely related to that, right? What's going on with the Supreme Court pick? So there's an article that just came out, I think, in the Atlantic. It's this is actually a special preview of the November 2020 edition that's called "The Election That Could Break America," and a lot of it reads like sort of typical breathless lib alarmism, which you shouldn't necessarily take that seriously, right? It deserves to be taken with a little grain of salt. But there is a key paragraph that's pretty interesting, right? So that paragraph, I am just finding it for you guys, is this: Trump may test this. According to sources in the Republican Party at the state and national levels, the Trump campaign is discussing contingency plans to bypass election results and appoint loyal electors in battleground states where Republicans hold the legislative majority. With the justification based on claims of rampant fraud, Trump could ask the state legislators to set aside the popular vote and exercise their power to choose a slate of electors directly. The longer Trump succeeds in keeping the vote count in doubt, the more pressure legislators will feel to act before the safe harbor deadline expires. So Let's talk about that, right? Because if this was just some resistance lib at the Atlantic who was speculating about possible things that the Trump campaign might do, okay, whatever, right? There are any number of hysterical, alarmist claims about what Trump might do that have been made by liberals at various times in the last 4 years. Most of them haven't happened. It's worth taking some of that stuff with a grain of salt, or maybe quite a bit of salt. But of course, the key paragraph in that, the key phrase in that paragraph I just read you is according to sources in the Republican Party at the state and national levels. And there are two ways of interpreting that, at least assuming that the writer for the Atlantic isn't just making it up, which are one, we're talking essentially about whistleblowers, which would be disturbing in one way. And the other is that this is not whistleblowers. This is the other way that you often see anonymous sources within some campaign, anonymous sources within some government institution, which is that it's a way for that institution or that campaign to put something out there, to float a little trial balloon to see how people react to it, because they want it to be out there, but they want to have deniability. They want to say, hey, we didn't say that. And this is something you see all the time, right? Often it's like anonymous, CIA officials making some hysterical claim about Iran or talk about what they might do. Again, it's just a way of a government official wants to put out a talking point into the public record, but they don't, but they don't want to put their names on it. They want it to, they want to be able to say, they don't want it to be, oh, here's the guy who said that, he might be okay with stealing the election. They just want that out there, either to get people used to the idea or as a kind of negotiating position that, hey, look, this is what we're thinking about doing if things don't go your way, just so you know, right? And maybe it's a bluff, but it's a very worrying bluff, right? To put it mildly, right? It's like when Trump was tweeting about just delaying the election, whatever you, sure, right? I mean, it'd be obviously it's not something he has the power to do unilaterally, and it's very, it's extremely unlikely that anything like that would happen. But the fact that it would do this little authoritarian trial balloon is disturbing in itself. And the same is true with some Trump campaign legal advisor, putting out there as an anonymous source, hey, if there's a big controversy about the vote counting and which mail-in ballots are counted, how it's going, and we can tell some kind of story about how the Democrats are really trying to steal it, then we might just ask state legislatures that are controlled by Republicans to just directly appoint the electors themselves and take it away from the voters of that state, which, by the way, under our embarrassing anachronistic 18th century Constitution, would probably not be illegal, right? Constitution just says that states have electors. It doesn't say, and that they get to decide how those are apportioned. So the way that custom tradition, right, is that the state's electors are apportioned generally in a winner-take-all way to whoever wins the popular vote in that state. But that's not actually illegal. That's not actually a legal requirement. So putting out there, right, kind of telegraphing this intention to just do a little state level legal coup, right, and just say, hey, voter, we might just ask Republican state legislatures to just ignore the vote in that state, is a pretty extreme trial balloon to vote. Like, hey, you guys make this difficult, we'll just steal it. Right? I mean, that's what they're saying there. And of course, Trump himself, in his explanation right? I mean, they'll steal it, as I see somebody pointing out in the chat, right? Their story about why they'll be stealing it, right, is the quote is the Trump campaign legal advisor I spoke with told me the push to appoint electors will be framed in terms of protecting the people's will. Once committed to the position that the overtime count has been rigged, the advisor said, state lawmakers will want to judge for themselves what the voters intended. So again, it would be, it wouldn't be framed as, oh, the voters picked Biden for Pennsylvania, but the state legislature is just going to pick some Trump electors. It would be framed as clearly Trump won the state, but now there are all sorts of challenges and controversies about mail-in ballots and other things. And look, the more mail-in ballots they count, the more of the vote is going to Biden. And this is clearly the Democrats trying to steal the election, they'll say. So to protect the popular will, we're just going to circumvent the courts that are making us count these mail-in ballots, and we'll just pick the Trump electors, right? I mean, that would be how they do it, right? That it would be presented as an end run to defend democracy. Of course, it would be exactly the opposite of that. And this is only one of many signals that they've sent like this, right? The other one brings us to the Supreme Court, where of course there's the main kind of controversy that's been framed about that after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been about whether it would be okay for the Senate to vote on a Trump nominee before the election, or really before whoever is the president starting in late January makes the appointment in late January or later. That's the way it's been framed. And of course, the issue is that liberals spent a lot of time saying in 2016 that, and then later in 2017 when Trump appointed Kavanaugh to fill Scalia's seat, that Merrick Garland's seat had been stolen. That was the talking point at the time. But at any rate, the talking point now is because the Republicans didn't want to fill that seat because it was an election year. It's hypocritical for them to want to fill this seat now. Of course, it is hypocritical. That and $5 will get you a cup of coffee. Thinking that Senate Republicans will be shamed by pointing out their hypocrisy is, not going to happen, right? Let's put it that way. But Trump has pretty directly said that the reason that he thinks there needs to be a ninth justice now is because of election challenges. Again, it's a way of telegraphing, hey, we might want to try to steal this thing, and we need the Supreme Court to have our back if we do that. And so we don't want there to be a 4-4 split decision if Roberts does the thing that Roberts does sometimes, where he defects from the conservative bloc. There was a good Chapo Trap House discussion about this with Matt Christman and Virgil Texas. The most recent one was another Beltway Garage, where I think Matt was talking about how it seems like what Robert's thinking is, right, is that you don't want to waste, right, the credibility of the court in case you really need it later on to block something like Medicare for All or a Green New Deal. So just a different way of putting the point is that Roberts will sometimes defect from the other conservatives in cases where he's worried that they're going to make some overly aggressive decision that would undermine the stability of the system and be bad for capital, right? He'll always side with corporations, right, in any kind of court case involving their interests. But sometimes with certain kinds of things like Obamacare, he might just decide, no, we don't want to we don't want to push this too far right now. This will be destabilizing, right? So for the sake of capital, I'll side with the liberals on this. And so Trump's concern, more or less openly, is that if he tries to steal the election, and there's an 8-person Supreme Court, then Roberts might do that, and you might get a 4-4 split. And so that's why I say, no, we need that extra Supreme Court justice in case we need to steal the election. Which, I don't know, points for honesty, I guess. I mean, obviously, it's an absurd and obscene system that's so undemocratic that an old woman dying 6 months earlier than she would have throws the fate of an election and the fate of a bunch of laws into doubt. But that's the system that we are that we're living in right now, right? That is the situation. And I think going back to the Merrick Garland thing, right? I mean, this is an important point to think about because I think that sometimes a lot of progressives, even people who consider themselves to be the left of liberalism, end up kind of falling for these liberal norms argument, right? Arguments that, oh, it's bad that Trump, disrespects norms, right? Of course, it'd be very bad if he stole an election, but not because he's violating norms, but because democracy matters, right? If you had a bunch of electors who defected to the popular vote winner, right, that would violate norms, but it would be good because it would be a defense of democracy, right? That the popular vote winner should win the election. And very similarly, I think with the Merrick Garland thing, that even some progressive shading into lefty commentators that I like, I think went along in 2016-17 with the Republicans are stealing the Supreme Court seat from Merrick Garland. They're, they gave Merrick Garland's Supreme Court seat to Brett Kavanaugh, which I always thought was a nonsense talking point, and here's why. Right? I mean, just imagine a very simple thought experiment. Imagine that Scalia had not died in 2016. Imagine that he had held on to his wretched life until 2020, and I don't know. He'd been out, at dinner with his friend Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A lot of the obituaries of Scalia noted that Scalia and Ginsburg were friends. This was something liberals, gushed about at the time. And so Scalia and Ginsburg were out at dinner somewhere, and I don't know, there had been an earthquake or something, and they both died. So now we're imagining that Scalia had held on to his life for a few more years, and he and Ginsburg had died on the same day last week. All right. So if that had happened, and so now Trump, under this scenario, got to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices at the same time in September of 2020. And the liberals wouldn't have any sort of, the Republicans are hypocritical for wanting to fill this seat argument, because there'd be no hypocrisy, because the whole Merrick Garland thing wouldn't have happened under this scenario. Okay. But let's say the Democrats held out anyway and said, we're not going to fill the seat, right? We want to wait for a new president in January. I would have cheered, wouldn't have you? Of course you would have, right? Because even though the Democrats in this scenario would be, quote unquote, stealing the Supreme Court seats from the conservatives, and they would be disrespecting a norm by doing so, clearly, yeah. I like Andy Jandrew World, who designs all the logos for the show, very talented artist, says in the chat, that should cheer, norm, right? Like from Cheers, every time somebody talks about the norms, right? But in this thought experiment, the Democrats would be the one who are doing the norm disrespecting. But that would be a good thing, because by disrespecting norms, they would be protecting abortion rights and collective bargaining rights and everything else that's at stake in these Supreme Court decisions. And of course, it would be completely legal. There's nothing in the Constitution about how quickly, right, the Senate has to vote on any Supreme Court nominee. So why not, right? Hell, change the thought experiment. Let's say that Scalia had only held on to his life for 1 year, right? Imagine that Scalia had died in February 2017. All right, now imagine a much better version of the Senate Democrats than the one that actually exists. And imagine that, despite being in the minority, right, despite, whatever, right, like imagine that they'd come up with a bunch of procedural blocks, that there were a bunch of procedural tricks up there at their sleeve, and imagine that the Democrats in 2017 had refused to hold a hearing on Trump's pick to replace Scalia in the scenario where Scalia only died in February 2017. So there was no Merrick Garland hypocrisy anywhere in the picture. Imagine that the Democrats had somehow managed to hold out for 4 years so that the next Supreme Court picks could be picked by the next Democratic president in 2020. Again, I would cheer, right? Wouldn't you? Right? Like that, this would be a massive norm violation, but it wouldn't be illegal, and it would be a very good thing, right? Because screw the norms. The defense of abortion rights and collective bargaining rights and everything else that could be under threat from, even the current 5-4 conservative Supreme Court, much less a hypothetical 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, with no Roberts factor, that everything that'll be under threat from that court is way more important than the stupid norms, especially when you realize that, forget getting rid of capitalism entirely, doing workers control the means of production. Not that we should forget that. I mean, that is very much the goal of my politics, but even just to enact a minimal, decent social democratic agenda, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, et cetera, in any future scenario where Bernie-crats controlled the House and the Senate, there would inevitably be all sorts of institutional obstacles to doing that from the courts and from other places. And any effective strategy for overcoming that institutional resistance would have to, as I said last week, not just violate norms, but set them on fire, right? We would have to be talking about things like general strikes and court packing and, all kinds of things that would be way further outside of the so-called norms than just not holding a hearing on a nominee for a year or 4 years for that matter. So if you want social democracy, you're going to have to say goodbye to the norms anyway. So you might as well get used to it, would be my 2 cents on that. I don't know how soon we're likely to see Supreme Court hearing abortion challenges. If anybody is aware of any particular cases, throw it in the chat. But the point is just that it's something that could very well be endangered in such a court sooner or later. If you have a pro-life majority of justices, especially if it's one that's not vulnerable to Roberts having his reservations about the stability of the system. Okay. Speaking of the many failures of the legal system, we just heard that only one of the officers involved in the murder of Breonna Taylor is going to be charged, and that officer is going to be charged not with murder, but reckless endangerment for shooting bullets into the wall that got into neighboring apartments, which is one more sign, of course, of the absolutely hideous imbalance of power between police and ordinary working class citizens in our society, which is, of course, exacerbated by racial disparities, but isn't reducible to them, right? I mean, this kind of militarized policing is a problem for poor neighborhoods in general. It's just that A, it's exacerbated by racial prejudice by police officers, and B, it falls most heavily on minority communities because minority communities are most likely to, the distribution of poverty between white and black Americans falls very heavily on black Americans. But the general structural problem is much bigger than that racial dimension, and it's a serious problem. And I think that very often people don't think nearly enough about what the solution might look like, right? So I'm just going to pick on a tweet here by somebody I like, right? Somebody I actually tremendously admire and would vote for without hesitation, with great enthusiasm, right? If I lived in her district, which is Ilhan Omar, right? Definitely one of the best members of Congress, who tweeted out this. This is what she tweeted today. Once again, the law says that property is more valuable than black life. We cannot let up in our fight for justice for Breonna Taylor and every black and brown person murdered at the hands of police. We will fight to end qualified immunity. So why am I picking on this? Well, it's certainly not because I think that we should have qualified immunity. We absolutely should get rid of qualified immunity, so that you can sue police officers and at least exercise some kind of accountability in these sorts of situations. No question about that. Right? That is something that 100% for sure should happen. But I think making that your sort of main talking point about this, we shouldn't have qualified immunity, bothers me in a little bit of the same way. Not that I'm saying, Ilhan Omar is somebody who generally has very good politics, certainly relative to Congress, my God, right? But they, yeah, qualified immunity is well, it's not just a norm, unfortunately. It's also an actual legal protection for cops, but we should get rid of it, right? Just as we should get rid of, just as we need to be prepared to trample over all sorts of norms of justice in these other areas we were talking about. But in any case, right? Qualified immunity is bad. We should get rid of it. But making that your main talking point, your main takeaway from stuff like the murder of Breonna Taylor and the cops, getting off as they always get off, bothers me for some of the same reasons that it bothers me when, like, a lot of libertarians will say, in our libertarian utopia, don't worry, you can just sue polluters when they dump toxic waste into the water and it kills your children. So because we'll have lawsuits and no tort reform limits on how much payout you can get in libertarian utopia, then it'll be totally cool that we don't have the regulatory state, right? It'll be totally fine that we don't have the EPA because we can substitute lawsuits, right? Well, if you can see why that kind of response is so unsatisfying, then not because, of course, we shouldn't sue polluters, right? Absolutely, sue polluters all day, every day, right? But suing polluters is not a sufficient solution to pollution, right? You need, at the very least, the regulatory state, and I would also say you need to change the economic system to change the incentives. But in any case, the problem with saying, we won't need a regulatory state because in a libertarian utopia we can just sue polluters, is that, well, one, generally speaking, big polluters will have a lot more money to spend on lawyers than any ordinary working class plaintiff. And sometimes, for some prominent cases, you get like big lawyers working pro bono, but you certainly can't count on that across the board. And two, that the lawsuit is a solution after the fact, right? That it gives you some measure of justice after you've already been adversely affected by the decisions of polluters, and maybe it can act, it can give companies an incentive not to pollute in the first place because they're not, they're worried about getting sued, but very often I think they're going to get away with it, right? And the problem is when you say that the big solution, the main solution to police violence is ending qualified immunity, then you have the same problems, right? Like all of those same objections apply. That generally speaking, most victims of police violence are poor, and so they can't afford good lawyers. And sometimes you might have prominent civil rights lawyers taking the case pro bono if it's like kind of gone viral, it's become a famous case. But of course, most cases of police violence don't go viral, right? Most of them, are relatively obscure. And again, everything that I just said about the environmental case, I think more or less applies here. That doesn't mean people shouldn't sue polluters, bring class action lawsuits. Doesn't mean that, people shouldn't sue the cops. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't get rid of qualified immunity to make it easier to sue the cops. But it does mean that can't be the centerpiece of our solution, right? That can't be the main thing the left has to say about this. It's just not going to be plausible that this could be the big thing that takes care of the problem. So what could be, right? What could a better solution look like? Well, you could have certainly certainly you can, we should demilitarize the police, right? That's the absolute bare minimum thing that we could do, right? That the military should not be selling old tanks to police departments. That is absurd and obscene, right? That's a obviously the local police departments should not be able to send out SWAT teams to break up illegal poker games. That's not a hypothetical example. That's something that has really happened, right? They shouldn't be able to send out SWAT teams, because some anonymous informant told them something about drugs, right? That's absurd. That's obscene, and so ending some of those practices is a very good start. Defunding can also be part of the picture here. I think that thinking that defunding is going to fund local social democracy, right? That we're going to be able to transfer resources to counselors, social workers, schools, right? All of these things that are going to be alternative solutions to a lot of the ills of poverty, besides aggressive policing, I think is a little bit naive. I wrote an article about this for Jacobin a while back. The reason I say that's a little bit naive is because if you actually start crunching the numbers in city budgets, there's just not that much money there. So, for example, the New York Police Department is one of the most militarized, most bloated police departments on the face of the planet. But even there, you could take away 50% of the annual operating budget of the NYPD and redirect it to the New York City public schools. You wouldn't have even come close to correcting the imbalance in poor, per pupil spending between rich and poor school districts in New York City. I mean, even if you took away 100% of the budget of the NYPD, you wouldn't have really accomplished that. So that's a big, that's one big thing, right? That defunding is just not the panacea that some people treat it as being. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Now, Dino Guastella wrote a good article about this for Non-Site. I don't agree with everything that he says, but in there, but one thing that I think he did make a really good point is that we should also be careful when we talk about defunding, because, of course, in some big cities, police officers are very well paid, but there are plenty of smaller cities and small towns where the armed and dangerous people enforcing laws are being paid like McDonald's or Walmart employee wages, and there are real questions there about whether you want people with guns making decisions like that to be under that kind of financial pressure, right? So that's also something that you have to keep in mind, right, in these defunding discussions. Now, I think once you set some threshold for every municipal employee should be paid a living wage, et cetera, right? Then the operating budget beyond payroll, I'm all for defunding that and transferring it to other kinds of city services. I just think we can't be naive about how much money is really there, right? You can't defund your way to local social democracy. If you want to really build up, counselors and social workers and all kinds of city services that can deal with various situations we send armed and dangerous police officers to right now, rather than calling the cops, you are going to need to raise taxes, right? That's going to have to be a massively important part of this. Don't at me, MMT people. I do, in fact, think that revenue is partially raised by taxation. But in any case, so I think demilitarizing is certainly part of the solution, right? That we shouldn't, if a local police department has the money to buy a tank, right, they shouldn't have that money, and in any case, the military shouldn't be allowed to sell it to them. And there should be, severe restrictions on, sure, you might need a SWAT team if there's a guy at the clock tower with a gun, but you should not be able to send a SWAT team to break up that illegal poker game, or respond to an anonymous, drug informant. So those things, again, that all sort of fall under the general heading of demilitarization are part of the solution. Some defunding could be part of the solution. But I think the biggest thing is democracy, right? Democratization, and this is a really important point, because I think actually on the subject of libertarians we were talking about earlier, right? Like some of the crazier libertarians will say, "Oh, the solution is we should like privatize the police because that way, they're not going to be acting violently towards their consumers, because they'll be interacting with citizens as consumers, so their incentives will be different," which is of course nonsense on stilts. The Cyberdyne solution, because what privatization would do is taking away what little democratic accountability exists in existing policing, which, as I said, is very little. Yeah, exactly. Somebody says in the chat, right? Privatized police sounds like warlordism. So that's the opposite of the direction you want to go. I think the much better direction is thinking about ways that you can make policing much more directly democratically accountable. So one obvious easy thing is giving community review boards the power not just to make recommendations, but the direct power to fire police officers. That would be a huge step in the right direction. All right. Is there anything else you want me to cover today? Send me a super chat or whatever. Give me a question. But otherwise, I guess I'll just wrap up by chat's cracking me up. Otherwise, I will just wrap up by talking a little bit about what's coming up on the show this week and other things that are coming up after that, and in Jacobin. Actually, I should, not going to start doing 12-hour streams. Sorry. So in terms of Jacobin, last time I talked a little bit about the Overton window. I have an article about that's already gone through edits. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to put it up, but it should be soon. Right. So again, the point of the article is why thinking about radical politics in terms of shifting the Overton window is just the wrong way to think about it, right? We don't want to, there's no way to sort of trick people into supporting reforms by talking about things that are more radical. That's not going to work. We should talk about more radical things because in many years we need those more radical things, and we want to build a movement that can actually fight to achieve them. But I think the whole moving the Overton window analogy is just a fundamentally confused way of putting that. So that's the next article coming out in Jacobin. Somebody asked about Yanis Varoufakis's Progressive International. I don't know a ton about that, but from what I know, it sounds like a good idea. Speaking of Jacobin, David Griscom and I have both been doing these short videos for Jacobin every week. So at first, they were just branding them as Jacobin Talks, right? Jacobin had their stay-at-home series, which was like somebody would give a lecture for half an hour, and then somebody, usually Bhaskar, I've subbed for him a few times, would do like a half-hour Q&A period with that person. Since they've just started calling those Jacobin Talks. And then when Griscom and I started doing these kind of weekly, like very short videos, like 10 minutes for Jacobin, at first those were just being called Jacobin Talks 2, but then it's like a little misleading, especially when they do it as premieres. People don't have the right expectations about what it is they're going to watch. So Cale Brooks, who's the producer for Jacobin's YouTube channel, if somebody says Jacobin is lightweight social democracy, you're talking to a very confused puppy, because everybody Jacobin that I know about advocates, sure, social democratic reforms to start with, right? But ultimately thinks we need to go beyond social democracy and challenge the structures of capitalism and have a completely new system based on workers' control and means of production, not just social democracy, but a socialism that comes after capitalism. In fact, actually, I should say, right now, I'm working on a book. We're in the very early stages, but I'm co-writing it with Bhaskar Sankara, who's the editor of Jacobin, and also Mike Beggs, who's an economist in Australia. And we're still writing the proposal right now. So this is very, very early stages. This is a book that might come out in I don't know, early 2022. But it's going to be called Life After Capitalism, How Socialism Can Work in the Real World. And it's entirely about how we could have a realistic, viable model of socialism where, we didn't have a capitalist class anymore, workers were in control of firms, all that good stuff. So again, I'll talk more about that when we get closer to it, but right now, very, very early stages. In terms of book I have already written, by the way, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, A Critique of the Contemporary Left. That is available for pre-order right now. In the past, I have, I've given the Amazon pre-order link because it was the only one I saw. But obviously, I don't like to direct people to Jeff Bezos's sweatshop when I don't have to. So the book, by the way, I got my author copies already. It doesn't come out till the spring. The wheels of book publishing grind very slowly, but I did get my author's copy. This is copies. This is what it looks like. And you don't have to pre-order it from Amazon. You can pre-order it from Red Emma's, which is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that, I try to direct people wherever possible because, hey, if you can order something from a worker co-op, right, why order it from a hyper-exploitive capitalist corporation like Amazon? But in any case, so there is you can pre-order Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, Critique of the Contemporary Left. You can pre-order that from Red Emma's. So just redemmas.org and search for it, and you should find the pre-order link. They also sell my first book, Give Them an Argument. I think they might be out of stock, but if so, they'll certainly be back in stock by tomorrow. Yeah, the online bookstore that I'm talking about, it's a worker cooperative bookstore. It's called Red Emma's, REDEMMAS. So redemmas.org. Again, if you can order something from a worker-owned bookstore, why wouldn't you do that instead of Amazon? And they've got decent selection. They don't have everything, but again, I do try to direct people to that where possible. At the very least, you can try them before ordering from Amazon, right? See if Red Emma's has it, and then if they don't, maybe you can order it from Amazon or somewhere else, right? But at least try it; it's worth a shot. Anyway, I was going to say, actually, also while we're talking about books, the book that I'm in a much more advanced stage of writing, relatively early, but I should be done much faster, right? It should come out by the end of next year, is the one on Christopher Hitchens, something I recently found out while researching that's awesome. I think he's okay with me saying this. Warren Ellis, probably not that Warren Ellis, says in Super Chat, we live on a finite planet. We can't have infinite GDP growth. MMT doesn't take this into account and will not save us. Please read Donut Economics. I have not read Donut Economics. My take on MMT is that it's a somewhat mixed bag. I think at least some things that MMT theorists say make sense to me. I don't reject the whole thing outright. But I do find the MMT argument about tax revenue not at least partially funding, not providing the revenue, for public spending, a little misleading. I get what they're saying, but I think that it's not the most natural way to express what they're saying. So I think it's like a little bit inaccurate, or at least misleading, and it's also politically counterproductive, right? So just to spell that out real quick, right? What MMT enthusiasts will often say, and I know this doesn't directly broach your question about GDP growth. In fact, my instinct is that that's a slightly separate question, right? Sure, whatever limits we have on resources that should limit state spending, in a planned economy, in a state economic development, or even the kind of state economic development you might get in a capitalist economy, that those might limit how much we decide to spend, right? But I think that's a slightly separate question from the MMT issue, which is how much we have to spend in the first place, right? In fact, what MMT theorists will typically say is they think that, okay, deficits are fine, but we do still have ecological limits, right? So I think, to be fair to the MMT crowd, they do know that, right? They do take that into account. My objection to the taxation and public revenue argument again, I know what they're trying to say, right? And because what they'll say is, look, revenue, right? Public spending isn't limited by how much you take in taxes, because if nothing else, right? I mean, just to put the issue a little bit crudely, but I mean, I think this gets the idea across well enough for right now. Hey, if you're a sovereign state that prints its own currency, you can just print more, right? Or whatever, they can sell bonds, all kinds of things that you can do to raise revenue. But of course, no MMT theorist thinks that it's totally fine to just keep printing money forever, right? Because one, there are ecological, limits, there are human limits, and two, there's the concern about inflation, right? That if just printing money. I mean, look, we're nowhere near those limits, of course, right now, in the here and now, certainly in the United States, right? But if you're just printing money, right, eventually you do trigger real worries about worrying levels of inflation. And so the way that MMT theorists will often put it is, the purpose of taxation then, or one of the purposes, besides preventing runaway and economic inequality and other things they might point to, but what they'll say is, one of the main purposes of taxation is fighting inflation. It's an anti-inflationary measure. Now, that's not exactly wrong, but I think it's an unnecessarily confusing and politically counterproductive way to put the point, because that, like, what they're saying is, okay, you can print money to a certain extent, but then you have to start worrying about inflation, right? So I think a much more natural way of putting that, right, would be, the money that's taken in by taxation does fund new public spending, but you can also do new public spending beyond the money that you take in with taxation by, for example, just printing money, right? But you don't want to do too much of that, right? Because then you have to worry about inflation. So that's a reason to that's a reason to raise taxes on the rich, so, along with all the other reasons, like preventing runaway economic inequality. So the thing is, and the way I just put it, right, I think it captures what they say, right? And it's much less misleading, right? Because it's unnecessarily confusing, not exactly accurate to say that the revenue you're using for spending does not come, at least in part, from taxation, and also saying politically it's just massively counterproductive, right? Because first of all, what a lot of people will hear is that you don't have guns versus butter trade-offs, which of course you do, right? Maybe you won't reach them until a later point than people think. But again, even the most starry-eyed MMT theorist says that we do have human and ecological limits. So you are going to run into those trade-offs, and I think it's both misleading and politically counterproductive to downplay that. And secondly, it's a much harder political sell, right, to say we need to raise your taxes in order to combat inflation, then we need to raise your taxes so we can have healthcare and education and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Especially because you can't fund a welfare state just by taxing, the rich, right? That you do need taxation from lower down than that. Now, that doesn't mean that the vast majority of the population isn't going to be getting back much more in services than they pay in taxes. The obvious, when I said I don't think it's that Warren Ellis, I was thinking of the comic book writer, who wrote Transmetropolitan, which is a really fun series about it's sort of a cyberpunky science fiction thing featuring a thinly disguised version of Hunter S. Thompson as the main character. But in any case, should tax the wealthy the most, for sure, right? But like the classic example, but you are going to need, taxes on other segments of the population, right? And again, that doesn't mean that most people aren't getting back more in services than they are paying in taxes. Of course they are, right? The classic example of this is Medicare for All, where the incredibly misleading talking point by centrists during the primary was, oh, we can't have Medicare for all, because that means raising taxes on the middle class, raising taxes on middle class families. But of course, the point that Bernie Sanders relentlessly and correctly, yes, Spider Jerusalem, that's the name of the character, the Hunter S. Thompson carried stand-in, that, yeah, you're raising taxes on middle-income people, but that doesn't mean that overall you're financially hurting those middle-income people, because what you want to be comparing is not just some middle-income taxpayers' tax burden right now with their tax burden after taxes have been raised to pay for Medicare for all. What you want to be comparing is the combined cost of their taxes and their private health insurance premiums, copays, and deductibles right now versus the cost of just the higher taxes they'll be paying after premiums, copays, and deductibles have been abolished under the Bernie Medicare for All plan. And of course, that second number is going to be way lower than the first number, and that was Bernie's point. Yeah, saw somebody in the chat mentioned Professor Wolf's nonprofit, Democracy at Work. Absolutely support that. I'm a huge fan of Wolf. The lame joke that I always make is that if you're a socialist who thinks they might want to be an academic, right? You're like an undergraduate student. Don't go to grad school for for something like English literature, right? We've already got, unless you're just super passionate about it, in which case do that, right? But we've already got more than enough socialist English professors. If you can possibly sneak in despite your politics, go to grad school in economics. So sure, you'll have to be exposed to several years of, obviously I didn't take this advice myself, right? But obviously you'll be exposed to several years of pro-capitalist propaganda. But if you get through it, right, you will be a world expert at refuting that propaganda. And then you can use your expertise to do the kind of work that Professor Wolf does. So the lame joke I always make about this is, more socialists should go to grad school in economics so we can have a whole pack of Wolfs. I realize that's a cigar chomping Catskills comedian in 1955 level joke, right? Somebody should be banging a gong behind me when I make it. But in any case, thank you guys for showing up. If there's no, political science is also good. Health philosophy is also good. Again, it's half a joke, although honestly, I do think we could use a lot more socialist economists. Total dad joke. I realize that. In any case, unless anybody's got a last minute super chat question, probably going to to cut it. I definitely don't think I'm David Feldman. There can only ever be one David Feldman. Oh, I'm not going to cut it there because I forgot what I wanted. Two things that I wanted to plug before I left today. So one of them, I mentioned the Jacobin short videos that David Griscom and I have been doing every week, which so these are just like kind of 10-minute sort of explainerish videos for Jacobin's YouTube. And so we've been doing them for I don't know, a few weeks, several weeks now, but they didn't have their own names. So right now they're the Jacobin Quick Takes. And so I did one this week. It actually just came out yesterday, so you can go check that out. It's called something like Why Socialists Care About Freedom and Equality, but basically what it's about is equality. And it's about whether socialists support complete equality of outcome, what that would even mean, why equality is an important socialist goal and how it relates to other goals, where, basically the very, very short preview of, the elevator pitch for this quick take video is that it's not that we necessarily think that everybody has to have a exactly even share of all resources at all times, like, Eighth Rothstein saying in Casino that, storming into the kitchen and saying there have to be exactly as many blueberries in every muffin. But we will cover Sturgill Simpson and at some point in the future on give them an argument for sure. But But that's not what we're talking about, right? Of course, we think that we should have worker-controlled firms where democratically decided pay scales, so you're not going to get these crazy imbalances like CEOs who make 400 times more than average workers make. But you can have incentives, right? In fact, some of those incentives in a socialist society might work in the opposite way from the inequalities that we're used to. That in a society where nobody was going to take the worst, dirtiest jobs out of desperation because they didn't have any other options, you might have to pay people more to take those jobs or to take essential worker type jobs. And you'd have to pay people to do things like be a college professor who could just be sent home with an employer provided laptop during a pandemic. But the reason that it's important to have a certain degree of material equality, not necessarily perfect equality, again, you could have incentives, but the reason that we want pretty close equality of outcome, right? We don't want those inequalities to get past a certain point, is because when you have massive inequalities like you have under capitalism, R.I.P. David Graeber. I didn't know him, but from what I knew of his work, I admired him. When you have these massive inequalities like you have under capitalism, that means that people are unfree in the most important way that they can be unfree, which is because the most important kind of freedom is freedom from domination, right? Coercion is often just a symptom of domination. And when some people are making so much less than other people that they're vulnerable to having to go to work for the first people and just live under their thumb, right? Then that's an important element of unfreedom, right? So what I argue in the video is that it's not that, the socialist left cares about equality and, maybe the libertarian right cares about freedom. It's the socialist left cares about equality because we care about freedom, right? Freedom from domination. So anyway, you can find that on the Jacobin YouTube. The Overton window article should be coming out on Jacobin's website very soon. Don't think it's up there yet, but again, it should be very soon. Sorry. I stand corrected. I just checked the website. It's on there right now. The article is called Let's Stop Talking About the Overton Window. So you can check that out on Jacobin right now. In fact, I believe if you click over to the Jacobin websites, that's jacobinmag.com. Yeah, you should see it right there up on top on the right. Let's stop talking about the Overton window. Yeah, damn that window. Socialist defenestration. But in any case, the anti-Overton window Jacobin article is up on jacobinmag.com right now. Go over to the Jacobin YouTube channel and find my video about equality. That's Jacobin Quick Take about equality. I mentioned that you can pre-order this book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, Critique of the Contemporary Left, from the worker-owned bookstore Red Emma's. That's redemmas.org. The thing that I was going to mention, I started to, and then I think there was a super chat question, and I got distracted, was that the book that I am hoping to finish writing by the end of the year, but the contract for it, has already gone through and everything. I'm under contract, right, for 0 books. Christopher Hitchens, what he got right, how he went wrong, and why he still matters. I've been researching this, and I think the person who told me this is okay with me saying it on stream. I hope so. My apologies to that person if not. But while researching it, I talked to somebody who was a student of both Christopher Hitchens and Slavoj Žižek at the New School. And they said that I think this was like 2009, 2010. This person tried to set up a debate between Žižek and Hitchens about the war. And they were both up for it, right? They both wanted to do it. Žižek thought that, like, out of the people with, pro-war positions, Hitchens was the one who had the best arguments. Hitchens, said, I don't know, at least knew enough about him to refer to him by his first name, right? Said, oh yeah, no, I'd love to debate Slavoj. Somebody respected him. And somebody in chat suggests that the cover image could be Hitchens flipping the audience the bird. I will, I'll take that under advisement. Think about that. Hitchens did debate George Galloway on the war, but in any case, apparently Hitchens and Žižek were both up for it, right? They both, they were both willing to do this debate, but then their schedules never quite meshed for them to find a good time. And then Hitchens got sick, and it just never ended up happening. Which I've got to say, I think is kind of a tragedy for YouTube, because I would have loved to watch that. I agree. Structural adjustment. Hitchens had some truly awful takes in the last decade of his life. I think the first 3 decades, from 1971 to 2001, I think he had extremely good takes for the most part. Right? Not always, but for the most part. And then I think, again, that's why it's in the subtitle of the new book, right? How he went wrong, right? Because I think he definitely went wrong in that last decade. And I think it's worth thinking about why, right? I think often I think it's too easy. I think it's a little too cheap to say, oh, he was a sellout, he was a grifter. I don't think that's it, right? I think that what's more productive is to think about how it is, as somebody says in the chat, that 9/11 broke his brain, right? How is it that somebody who shared so many of our starting points as on the anti-war left could end up in such a horrible position, right? We should think of it more like on the model of how we think about 1930s leftists who, out of a sincere desire for a better world, ended up becoming apologists for Stalin's reign of terror. I think that the Iraq War is, very similar kind of moral monstrosity, right? But again, I think it's more productive to start thinking about how somebody who started out with good impulses could have made it there, and then what we can learn from that, right? Those of us who do think that it was a horrendously bad position. So anyway, that's my take. Going to try to, try to make that argument in the book. Meanwhile, you can pre-order Canceling Comedians or order Give Them an Argument from Red Emma's. That's the end of my pitch for that. The other thing, I guess the last thing I should plug before I go is the next episode of Give Them an Argument. Recording, of course, as always, on Saturday. So the new episodes record from 4 to 6 p.m. On Saturday afternoons. If you want to sit in on that, be in the studio audience, you can do that on Zoom. Just check out my Twitter the day before. I always pin the tweet with the Zoom link the day before, and then goes to David Feldman, who has been helping me with the sound editing for the podcast, and Forrest Miller, who also does the video editing for Jacobin and the Michael Brooks Show, and they do the heavy lifting there, editing it, and then the nice edited version goes out as a podcast on Monday and premieres on YouTube. It's always 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. So the next episode is going to be Wosny Lambre, Big Woz, and also Shahid Buttar, who's running to replace Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. So I'm looking forward to both of those. I really, Big Woz was, of course, the co-host for years with Michael Brooks of Woke Bros, and he does lots of other stuff, and he's a very good, very entertaining interviewee. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him. And the Shahid Buttar campaign, I think, is incredibly important. I know it's a long shot, right, electorally, right. That unfortunately the smart money is on Pelosi to keep that seat, but I think that any kind of heat helps. I think demonstrating that you can even get a decent vote against Pelosi as Democratic Socialists should make it more likely that there are going to be more serious challenges in the future, and that's a good thing. Michael Brooks and I both have brief roles in a Shahid Buttar commercial that was put out in February. So I've been supporting him at least since then. And in fact, the day I believe that Bernie dropped out and I canceled my monthly recurring donation to Bernie, I transferred it to the Shahid Buttar campaign. Because again, I think that Pelosi is really, without hyperbole, an enemy of the human race. And so, if we could get if we could get it replaced with a Democratic Socialist, that would be amazing. Again, I know it's probably not going to happen. It's a long shot. But it's important. It's important to support the campaign, and I think it's particularly important to support the campaign because there was this cancellation attempt, right? That there was this attempt to accuse him of inappropriate behavior. If you want a good breakdown of that, watch or listen to the episode of Useful Idiots with Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper, where they talk to Shahid Buttar about it. Or for the short version, watch his conversation with Sam Cedar on the Majority Report. I think those sources really break down why those accusations are not credible. And really, I think this is something we just need to learn to stop falling for quite so easily, right? Obviously, anybody who really was, harassing anybody or acting inappropriately with employees, obviously it's not acceptable. But as with the Alex Morse scandal, we need to stop being such easy marks for this, right? Because if we just take accusation as conviction, right, and just blindly believe anything anybody says, no matter how vague and not credible, then it's going to be super easy for centrists to use this stuff against us anytime they're worried about a left-wing challenge. So I think you just can't buy into that, right? I think that we need to be much more skeptical and cautious about throwing left-wing candidates under the bus when we start hearing these things. So anyway, I am still supporting Buttar. I'm going to talk to him on Saturday. Also going to talk to Big Waz. Also, of course, there's going to be the Outlaws and Revolutionaries segment, as always, with the great David Griscom, my friend and comrade. Drink a little whiskey and talk about country music. Always a fun way to end up the episode. So really looking forward to that. But I think with that, somebody asked about Planet of the Humans, the Michael Moore documentary. I think, my friend Lee Phillips had some criticisms of the content of it in Jacobin that seemed like real, substantive criticisms. But whatever you think of the content of the movie, I think the free speech issue with YouTube pulling that at one point for the flimsiest of reasons is very worrying, right? That this is something that we need to be on guard against, because newsflash, we live under capitalism. Big corporations like YouTube control massive amounts of the flow of information, and corporate censorship can be as worrying as public censorship. So I think that's something we should take seriously. Anyway, I am going to cut it there for today. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. This was a lot of fun. I've been really enjoying doing these. So I will see some of you on Saturday when we record the episode. Again, that premieres on records on Zoom, live to tape Saturday afternoons, premieres on YouTube 7:30 p.m. on Monday, and then I might do another one of these like I did last week if there's a big news development before the episode. But otherwise, we'll do the next one of these live streams next Wednesday. Thank you guys all so much for showing up and asking questions.